Are car manufacturers deliberately sabotaging engines? Are they designing engines that fail after a few years to force us to go out and buy new cars? And they're ramping up the prices of these new cars, so they're costing more and more money so they can make more and more profit. But is there something perhaps more sinister going on behind the scene that's going to affect our future car ownership? It's handy for us to understand some of the evolutions and revisions that engine makers have had to make over the years and look primarily at the reasons why they've had to make this. It's fair to say that emissions regulations are one of the biggest driving factors in innovation when it comes to car engines. The combustion engine is very different now to how it was 20, even 30 years ago. There's lots more technology in it. And most of the things that I'm going to be mentioning in this video are things associated with the emissions, keeping the emissions from the vehicle as low as possible and meeting these new regulations as they come out. So the first thing is the stop-start system, often hailed as an engine killer. Personally, I think they're very well designed, very well engineered, modern engine oils, modern stop-start systems. They don't shut the engine off when it would be dangerous to do so, like when the engine is cold, when you've been doing lots of spirited driving on the turbocharger, although some manufacturers have rather questionable implementations and it's very crude, always wanting to turn the engine off. The main driving force behind stop-start systems is to reduce this idling that goes on when people are in urban areas. So with the engine off, you're not idling, you're not chucking out all of this pollution. The other benefit is you're also not suffering from all this blow-by that's going into the engine oil, and the engine oil is becoming diluted. So the stop-start system can actually stop a lot of this wear and tear and damage going into the oil. So a measured driver tends to use the stop-start when they're doing serious delays in traffic. If it is literally stop and go traffic all the time, they tend to switch the stop-start system off so they can just get on with driving the car. The PCV is another thing that manufacturers have added. It was probably one of the earliest emissions regs that came in. And basically inside the engine, you have pressure building up. You've got blow-by gases coming past the piston rings. The crankcase itself becomes very pressurized. It can affect oil. You can start having oil leaks if the pressure builds up too much in the crankcase, and it can affect the efficiency of the engine. So they want to release that pressure. And rather than just venting that out into the environment or the atmosphere, where all of the combustion fumes, the oil vapors and everything else inside the crankcase is potentially an environmental hazard, they've decided to route that back into the intake. So the engine basically sucks all of these vapors back in, and it is then burned and combusted, so it's not going to go out and harm the environment. In theory, it works quite well. Most PCV systems are quite effective, but when they start playing up, they can be really problematic. I've got another video that we've done quite a while ago on the PCV and detecting problems of it. But these can lead to expensive repairs, excessive oil consumption. It's been linked to carbon buildup on the intake as well, and a whole host of additional problems that have crept up that affect the long-term reliability of our car. The EGR, the exhaust gas recirculation system, is certainly not there to improve economy, to improve the power of the car. It is purely there to reduce the NOx gases, the nitrogen oxides that the engine emits when it's burning fuel. The big problem that manufacturers have with EGR systems is they're very, very clunky. They allow a lot of the soot that the engine is exhausting back into the intake. The whole idea is to lower the temperatures of the combustion process, which reduces the formation of these nitrogen gases. But the EGR is complex, it clogs up, the valve doesn't always work effectively, it deposits carbon on the intake. There's actually a whole host of complaints and problems with long-term reliability because cars have this exhaust gas recirculation system. And a lot of people cite it as eating your own excrement. The exhaust gases shouldn't really be going into the intake of the engine. It is going to affect the performance and the long-term reliability of the engine. But manufacturers have done that to just reduce this one aspect of emissions. Let me know what your thoughts are on the EGR system. Is it more trouble than it's worth? Do you always look to take it off? Is it legal to take it off in your area? Another thing that happens with modern engines is they use a lot of plastic components. Now, plastic is fragile. It's generally okay until you touch it. In the olden days, when we used to have proper metal manifolds, you could take them off and put them on and they would always work. You were just changing the gasket each time, obviously. But these modern ones, every time you take off a plastic manifold, you will find that it tends to split. It doesn't always go back on, so you have to buy a new one. Plastic is much cheaper. It's lighter, so it's saving weight on the overall engine. And also because it's made of plastic, it's easier to mold. So you can pay a lot of attention to the flow characteristics of the shape of these plastic intakes. But there's lots of other plastic parts on engines. And I've seen so many faults that have been happening just because of plastic has been used. I had a car which kept going through clutch cables, and it wasn't the cable, it wasn't the cable mechanism, it was a plastic clip that just kept breaking on the cable where it engaged against the clutch pedal itself. So it was a very, very simple fix. You just replace that part with a metal part and it lasted forever, or it certainly lasted the rest of the time that I had the car. So manufacturers have kept costs as low as possible, but they're using a lot more plastic, a lot more inferior components, which again is affecting the long-term reliability of our cars. Your modern combustion engine needs a timing belt, but some manufacturers have opted to put that inside the engine. So it's a wet belt, and exposing the rubber belt to all of the oils and everything going on inside the engine is going to lead to faster degradation. You also have a problem with sludge building up around the components connected to this belt. It can affect the tensioners and their ability to keep the tension correct on these belts. Generally, in most cases, the wet belt has been a complete disaster, but manufacturers are still opting to fit these to engines, and they're fine through the warranty period. They'll get you through the 3, 5, 7 year warranty period, but after that you start having lots of problems associated with this. So now we've got something that's been fitted to all of the exhausts on modern cars. We've got particulate filters, we've got catalytic converters. They're all designed to clean up what comes out of the tailpipe. Now, the particulate filters themselves tend to get clogged up. They're generally fine for the first few years of car ownership, but if you resort to doing short journeys, if the engine is not running as clean as it was, you've probably got a little bit of degradation on the injectors, and those injectors are not firing as cleanly as they were when they first came out of the factory. That can lead to accelerated soot buildup inside the particulate filter. Catalysts themselves are also a restriction in the exhaust flow. So any kind of restriction is going to sap power. I know manufacturers have gone a long way to remove the restrictions in these devices by using larger bore sizes. More cells have been added to the catalysts and also the particulate filters. But overall, over time, these things will start to clog up. They will start to affect performance, and they're very expensive to replace or repair when they start to go wrong. And then we come to direct injection. So we're no longer squirting fuel through the intake into the engine, we're squirting it directly into the engine. Now, the main problem with that is it's not cleaning off the carbon that builds up on the intake, but if you can prevent the carbon from getting on the intake, it shouldn't be a problem. But manufacturers have got all these other pollution controls that we've spoken about that are dumping all of this stuff, all this sticky oil residue and all these carbon deposits from the engine on the intake, but there was nothing there to clean it. So some manufacturers have opted to put injectors in the port and use direct injection. The big benefit of direct injection is it's allowing manufacturers to use much higher compression ratios to minimize the amount of fuel that the engine is using. We're able to extract more power from the engine nowadays because we have direct injection. Direct injection systems themselves are quite complex. They're operating at ridiculously high pressures, so there's a lot of scope for things to go wrong, and they get to be quite expensive to sort out. Personally, I think direct injection has been a great innovation. It's just the implementation of it with all these other pollution control systems that have led to problems. But manufacturers are engineering around a lot of these faults and a lot of these issues. The takeaway at the end of this video is that most manufacturers have had to meet emissions regulations, and as a result of trying to meet those emissions regulations, they've effectively stifled the ability of the car to maintain its reliability in the long term. And they're looking at a fairly short warranty period window. And if the car is outside of that, it doesn't really matter to them. And we could even cynically say they're going to make more money out of repairs when these items start to fail and we have to go out and get them repaired. So please let me know whether you think this is a big conspiracy against the motorist, or whether manufacturers are sincerely doing their best to meet these emissions regulations, and whether you feel the emissions regulations are unreasonable, unreasonably strict, or do you see the emissions regulations as being something positive for the planet and for the environment? Let me know in the comments. I love hearing your thoughts on this important debate that we all face in this modern world as motorists. And please boot the like button. That really does help us to get out there. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. I know about 95% of you are not subscribed to the channel, so that would really help us out if you could just hit that subscribe and bell icon. And I've lined this video and this playlist up for you that you should find really interesting. Thanks for watching. See you in these next videos.